I've lived most of my life way out in the countryside of Ontario. Given that, there's not a whole lot for an 18-year-old to do, but for me, it's the only place that I can call home, and I like to think that I know the area like the back of my hand. Now, I did adventures across the long, crossing roads, pastures, and woods that made up the skeleton of my village. As a young kid, I had a habit of biking extremely far out in the hopes of finding new places, and sometimes my dad or one of my friends' parents would toss their bikes out in their pickup and then take us way out into the back roads and let us explore for a few hours. This is how we found an old shack. It was near a tree line that was very thin, like about 20 meters off the path. Honestly, I never thought anything of it, except for the fact that it was creepy. It had no windows inside. I never went anywhere near it, but one of my friends at the time said that her older sister had tried to get in and the door was always locked. We all had better things to be curious about at the time than that anyway, so I quickly moved on, and it became nothing more than a mundane landmark of the area. Honestly, I had completely forgotten about it a few years after. Except for last Tuesday. I was coming home from one of my very late classes at university, and I usually take the back roads, as they're very straightforward and scarcely ever have any traffic. While driving along the long gravel path that would wind along the country and eventually take me to the next turn I needed to turn onto, I noticed a faint glinting coming from within the trees up ahead. It's about 100 meters from my car. Is it a flashlight? I wasn't sure. As my car come closer, I realised what I was really seeing. The light inside of the shack was on. I should mention now that in all of my nearly 13 years I spent living in my area, I've never seen the door open. I have never seen a light on the inside of that shack. I mean, never. Not even once. I must have driven past that shack probably almost 100 times in my life, but I'd never seen any sign of a person's presence being there. This, coupled with the fact that it was 10 o'clock at night and pitch black out, filled me with what I can only describe as a sense of dread. It would be hard for some people to deal with this, but I'm not one that gets easily spooked. Unfortunately, while my car approached the light, I was curious enough that despite the feeling in my stomach, I slowed down as I was about to pass, hoping that I could see what was going on inside. And this is probably the only reason I managed to spot the dark shape that burst out of the foliage on my side of the road, directly into my path. I wasn't going very fast at this point, but I still pounded the brakes on hard. For a moment, I was really confused, and then freaked out. What was it? Did I almost hit a deer? This was far out in the country. A deer would have been the most likely candidate, but it didn't feel like that's what it was. Then, in the beams of my car, I could see what had stopped me. A very tall, lanky man with scraggly hair. Right away, I got the impression that he was very poor. He looked dirty and unkempt, and his clothes hung off him. However, I generally am not used to seeing people this far out. I don't like to judge people right away, but I'm extremely unsettled over what this guy is doing, just standing there, and why on earth did he just keep on walking out in front of my car? As I sat there confused, the old man come around to my window and knocked on the glass. Feeling the memories of stranger danger conversation with my parents kicking in. As old as these convos were, I rolled down the window just a crack. I did so only enough to just be able to hear him. I was really creeped out enough as it was. Immediately, I had to say what I was thinking. "What are you doing here?" I said. Then something caught my attention in my peripheral vision. I got a little shaken by that. Now, I could see the light from the shack, but in my mind, I wasn't really registering it anymore. Stupid, I know. I should have made the connection immediately, but I was still kind of shaken by the fact that I could have ran this guy over if I didn't stop in time. Being a new driver, the thought of that terrified me. After a small pause, the man started talking to me. He had a thick, croaky voice. He spoke very slowly. "My truck, it's broken," he explained. Okay. I was also getting that weird feeling that he wasn't being honest. Now mentally, I didn't have to look around to realise there wasn't a truck on the side of the road, but I did anyway. Turning my head around confirmed what I already knew. There was no truck. He had somehow driven it into the trees or something. As far as I could remember and see, there wasn't enough space anywhere for them to put a truck through. What's this guy on about? While I was looking, I could tell that this guy wouldn't stop watching me. And when I turned to look again, he was still leaning down and peering inside my window at me. "Where? I don't see it," I said. I was definitely distrustful of this guy already. At first, he didn't reply, and my nerves were only getting worse and longer for the time that we're alone out there. Then he replied, "Just up the road," he said, turning a finger just to point in that general direction. Now I looked over, and the lights on my car aren't exactly the greatest, but I could still see far enough that I couldn't imagine where on earth his truck was meant to be. I couldn't spot the faintest sight of it. While I squinted up ahead, he continued, "If you come here, I'll show you." At this point, I really had no idea what this old man was thinking. Why would I be able to help? I'm 18, female, small. I don't exactly look like the kind of person that knows a lot about cars or how to fix them. But I was tired from a long day at school, so I wasn't at my brightest, and for some reason, a part of me felt guilty about leaving him out there alone. "Okay," I said, as I reached in my gear shift to start slowly going up the road, but as soon as he saw my hand, he shook his head. "Just walk. It's not that far." "What? Excuse me? No thanks." How the hell was I going to see anything in the dark? If I got out of my car, he would obviously follow me anyway. Neither of us would be able to see. There was no harm in driving whenever he was trying to lead me. The more I talked to the guy, the more unnerved I was getting. More and more red flags started popping up in my mind. I couldn't see a car anywhere, and this total stranger wanted me to get out of mine and follow him into the dark on this creepy road in the middle of nowhere. I'll admit that yes, I'm a naive person, but I'm definitely not stupid. I then turned and said to him, No, I'd rather drive to it." The situation was really not making any sense to me. I could see his brow furrow, and he looked a bit agitated. He insisted, "Your car won't fit in the trees anyway." I then started thinking to myself, did he actually crash? But then I asked him, "Then how did yours get up in the trees?" The only logical explanation would have been that his truck had swerved off the road, but even if that were the case, there was seriously nothing I could have done to help him fix his car or get it back out again. It genuinely made no sense at all to be asking for me to come and help. The entire situation was beginning to make me very scared. Now there was a lengthy enough pause in between what I said and his reply. I knew something was up. I asked him again. Still no immediate answer. When he did finally reply, he was staring directly into my eyes. I think I'm gonna have nightmares about it for a long time. It was so sudden and so creepy and just unbelievable. He said, "You don't look old enough to drive." I hear comments like this a lot, so I know I look very young, but people would say this with a smile or be joking, but he didn't do this in the slightest way. His expression didn't change, He was still staring directly into my eyes with this horrible cold look on him. The sheer inappropriateness of a remark in that kind of situation immediately got my heart going. All I could think was, my God, what did this guy want with me? What I wanted to say next was, who the hell are you? But instead, I anxiously fumbled for my phone in my pocket, babbling in a way that probably made it really obvious that I was really freaked out, saying, okay, look, I'll just call someone to come and help you. There's nothing I can do, really. As I said it, it occurred to me to wonder, did this old guy have a cell phone of his own? I know not every old person has one, but they're becoming common. But seriously. And then I also remembered, with a sudden streak of massive fear, the shack with the light on. I could still see the light coming from it just up ahead of the trees, and my dumb brain finally put two and two together. The old man hadn't mentioned this at all. It was like it wasn't even there to him, and there was definitely no one out there that could have turned the light on but the old guy who was standing outside my car. What was he doing out there in the shack? It would have been locked away for all those years by someone I never knew. There was definitely no truck around me. He obviously wanted me to get out for a complete different reason. I think maybe the old man must have seen on my face that I was scared out of my life and about to book it out of there. Instead of any words, his face contoured to that of rage. Without any warning, he swung his fist, pounding it against my window with enough strength to make it shudder. His eyes were wide, and he looked furious and completely insane. At this point, even though I was panicking more than I ever had in my life before, I was sure he was about to smash the window again if he tried. I screamed, threw my phone onto the floor, changed gears, and slammed my foot down to the gas pedal hard. I hurled down the road, and when I glanced into my rearview mirror, I saw his dark shape. He was standing at the end of the road, staring at me. Then he walked off directly into the light of the shack. I didn't slow down at all until I was nearly home. I was absolutely sure that there was no way that he could have followed me. When I got home that night, I spent a long time crying about what had happened with my mum. I think she didn't even believe all of what I told her. She called up everyone she knew to ask if they knew this guy, or if they knew who owned the shack. In a town like ours, everyone knows each other, but nobody had a clue who he was. Some of our family friends even swore that they were sure that it's been abandoned for at least 5 years now. Since most people don't usually take that road, nobody could be certain, but they all said that they've never seen the light on there before, or the door open. I've now been taking a complete different route home. I really don't ever want to go back down that road again. I hope I never meet that creepy guy in the shack again.
It was a really beautiful summer night, and my friends and fellow actors and I were all sitting on the roof of their building and smoking and drinking. It was that kind of night where you could sleep anywhere. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the temperature was perfect. All you had to wear was a t-shirt and your jeans. No jackets or sweatshirts were necessary. There were probably 5 of us in total. This building was a very old and very large industrial building in our city. There is a well-known room in this building that's nicknamed the Piano Graveyard, because there were tons of pianos all in one room, just collecting dust. The owner wasn't very good at keeping up his property or even visiting it. Since the property had been sold, it's now under reconstruction. Pretty much everyone that rented an artist loft in this building also lived in it, despite this being against the policy of the rental agreement. I love this building to this day. It's one of the most majestic buildings in our city that I've ever had the pleasure of exploring. Back to the evening at hand. There were 5 of us, but the participants dwindled over time until there were just 3 of us, myself, my boyfriend at the time, and his close friend, Kurt. We stayed up there for probably an hour or so after the other 2 of our friends had left. One of the really curious things about this building was the way you had to navigate hallways. and different levels to get to the very tippy top of the tallest point in the whole building, which was a tower that we hung out on top of. In the tower was a moderately sized room. I'm not sure what its original use was. There were open windows in all directions, and it does have the feeling of a bell tower with no bell. In this room, there was a last set of stairs that you had to climb, and they were ridiculously uncomfortable and steep. At this point, I decided it was getting really late and I was ready to go home. I told Kurt and my ex-boyfriend this, and we started to wrap our time together. Kurt started down the stairs before both of us, and I left my boyfriend to go ahead of me, to kind of hold his back for support. It was really late, but Kurt had a flashlight held out so we could see the way. Naturally, Kurt reached the landing of the stairs before my boyfriend and I did. By this point in the evening, I'd had a few beers, and may or may not have been stoned. Due to this, I was super focused on making sure I didn't catapult my body into my boyfriend and Kurt accidentally missing a step. Because of this, I didn't see what happened at first, but my boyfriend stopped in front of me. I then realised someone was talking, and I didn't recognise the voice. "What are you doing with that flashlight, man? Don't you know someone lives here?" Quickly, Kurt cut the light. My eyes flickered up to find the unknown voice, and I barely caught a glimpse of the man's figure right before Kurt turned off the flashlight. It felt pitch black in the room, and my heart immediately jumped into my throat. Kurt replied with, "I'm sorry, man. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I didn't know you were here." The man replied with something. I don't remember what he said. Honestly, all I could think about is that there was no way to safety. I was literally as backed into a corner as anyone could be. Behind me was the roof and the tallest point of the building, and between us and the door was this crazy man, who was insanely upset that we invaded his personal space, in a tower in an abandoned part of the building. Kurt seemed genuinely afraid, and judging by their interaction, they didn't know each other. The man threatened us somehow, I can't remember how. I think he said something along the lines that if we went up there again, he would make us very sorry that we did. We left that moment and went downstairs. All of us freaked out, but we didn't talk about him much. We were just focused on making it to safety, and quickly. When we got to the loft that Kurt was staying in, with the other actors of this troupe, we were saying our goodbyes, and I wanted to bring reference to that weird encounter. That was pretty weird. Did you guys know who that was? "What guy?" Kurt replied. This caught me off guard, but I thought he might have genuinely been asking, so I answered, "The guy we ran into in the tower, the one you were talking to. Does he always live there? He seemed super pissed and aggressive." I shit you not, Kurt looked at me like I was crazy and said, "I wasn't talking to anyone in the tower, Hannah. What are you talking about?" I decided to drop it right then and there. My ex and I left for the evening. My ex confirmed my experience, and that it was weird that Kurt would lie about it. I still don't understand why he would lie about that. I have a few theories, but none of them make any sense. He maintained for the rest of the friendship that there was no guy he talked to that night, and we must have been hearing things. So eerie and so strange.
A while back, when I lived in a small town with long winding stretches of roads between my home and my workplace, I had a rather unsettling run-in with a police officer. I worked a night shift, so it's about 11 PM. I set out towards a hotel that I worked at. I have a GPS system that logs an insane amount of information about my drive, so I definitely wasn't speeding. After about a mile with this, I notice a car starts following me closely. After a couple of miles of this, I've decided I've had enough, so I switch lanes in front of a few other cars and keep driving. Predictably, this person does the same and follows me. Now finally, after being tailgated for about 13 miles, I get to a lone stretch of road and the speed limit increases to 55. I gladly take the opportunity to go faster once I pass the sign, and admittedly, I get up to 57, but this person continues. He then turns his lights on. I'm already nervous as the road is dark and it's late out there, but there's just enough cars going by for me to have a reason to pull over. The cop then decides to turn his lights off, which I'm certain they're not supposed to do. He approaches my window and moans at me for speeding, saying I was doing 70 in a 30 zone on the street. I then tell him that I have a GPS that can log everything and says otherwise. I then bluff a bit, saying that I have a device from my insurance company that also tracks my driving. He claims he saw me weaving all over the road and assumed I was drunk. I question why. If I was speeding so seriously and driving badly, why did he follow me for 13 miles? Why was he weaving in and out of cars and not just pulling me over immediately? He ignores my question, glances down and says that I can't park where I am. He tells me that I got to pull into an empty lot of a nearby hill, a lot that was completely impossible to see from the road. Nervous, I act like I'm gonna and accidentally pass it. I then go to a residential area with lots of lights. The cop gets out, obviously mad, and demands to see my license and reg plate. I showed him. He then gets in his car for just a few moments, during which I obviously got out my phone and tell my co-worker what's going on. He then gets out of the car, returns my information claiming that he's going to give me a warning, and drives off. He returned my registration but kept my license, and the slip had a bunch of scribbles on it. There weren't actually any real words on it. The next day, I called the station asking for my license, and of course, he hadn't turned it in. I told them what had happened and given them some information. They said that they're going to look into it. I never heard anything back from it, but it was obvious somebody was pretending to be a cop to do God knows what to me.
So this just happened about 2 hours ago. I'm pretty shaken up, but as soon as I got out, the first thing that crossed my mind was to post my encounter here. So here I am. To give a little background, I'm a film student in college right now, and me and my buddies are always trying to find new locations to film our movies at. I make horror films, so all the places I'm looking for and exploring are abandoned. Tonight, me and my group of friends, about 10 of us, decided to check out this abandoned hospital down the street from our school. They had been there and said it was a great spot for filming, and I should check it out. Tonight was that night. So when we get there, I had my Nikon DSLR out and a handheld LED light attached to the top of the camera to scout the place out when we get inside. I didn't film any of the encounter because I usually only film the inside of these places, but I had my camera and light out to shine the way through. I was leading my way down to this narrow path that led to these walls that we had to climb to get on the roof of the place, where we would access one of the rooms to get inside the building. Because I was carrying my camera and bag, I was trying to look for another way up. So I walk a little further down this narrow path, and I start noticing a lot of clothes and random shoes and cardboard boxes lying around the area. There was even an empty sleeping bag. That's when I knew we probably weren't alone, and we were likely going to run into someone if we made the wrong move. And boy did we ever. One of my friends was walking behind me down this path, and notices a door to my right. It's closed, and my guess is that it was locked and not worth trying. But he already has his hand on the handle and starts tugging. I look over and it barely cracks open, but something is holding it from the inside. I shine my LED on the inside, and I see a shirt tied to the inside door handle to another part of the room, acting as a lock. But my friend, being the way he is, tugs again and rips the shirt right off, and the door swings open. Inside, there is someone sleeping on a table or a couch, alongside a group of terrifying looking people sitting by light inside that room, and they all stop and stare at us. In the short glimpse that I got, my friend yells, "Oh damn, get the hell out of there," and slams the door and just bolts past me. I was standing there a little shaken, almost feeling like I should apologise, but I just follow him instead. My other 8 friends are already on the roof at this point, ask what's going on, and we just run for our lives out of the area. I hear the door in the path swing open, but I couldn't look back. From there, me and my friend run back to a higher part of the area, away from any entrance leading to the hospital. There is a small gap that you could jump across to get to one of the roofs of the building that my other friends were on. About 4 of them follow us and jump across, ready to get out of there, but the others stay on the roof and watch us, stuck like statues. I look at them, confused at what they're staring at, and I begin to hear this metal dragging across the concrete. I turn around and there's a crazy looking man, maybe mid-20s, dragging a baseball bat with nails along the end, walking towards us as he drags the bat along the concrete, acting like Negan from The Walking Dead. My heart sinks. At this point I turn off my light and all that's shining is the moon. I keep my hand on my pocket knife, desperately trying to think of anything to do if he starts swinging, but I knew there was no way I could come out alive if I tried anything. Plus I've got to take care of my camera. He walks closer to us and the first thing he says is, "You're going to want to keep that light off." And everyone is silent. I'm practically shaking. And then he starts circling around us and says, "You guys are never going to come back here, right?" He walks right past me and sees the camera. He raises his bat saying, "Are you going to put the camera away?" I just barely say, yeah, it's off." He looks over at my friends watching on the roof, past the gap. He then points to them and says, "Jump." And they stand silent. The guy says again, "Jump across it right now. Just run and jump, you'll make it." Keep in mind that the gap doesn't look that bad, but the drop is fatal if you don't make the jump. And all of my 4 friends are staring down the drop, fearing what could happen. One of them says, "I don't think I can make it," and the Negan guy replies, "Run and jump or else you're going to regret it." So my friend steps back, runs, and barely makes the jump. From there, one by one, the other 3 make the jump, all while the Negan guy is standing right behind us with his bat, dragging it along the concrete. Once we all got across, he says, "You're never coming back here again, you understand?" We all awkwardly apologise and run back to our cars in the distance. I get in my car and look back at the area, and he's standing there, watching us with his bat as we sped off. Realistically, we could have probably ganged up on him as a group if anything bad happened, but who knows what else was back there. Sadly, the hospital is a no-go from here on out, but I'll still be looking around for some good locations. What scared me the most was how fearless and disturbed the guy looked. He'd definitely seen some bad stuff before, and undoubtedly used that bat before on someone else. He looked like a killer, I'm sure he was, and his calmness is what really got me. Definitely a lesson learned, but regardless, let's not meet again.
One of my favourite activities is exploring old, abandoned buildings. I've seen quite a few strange things during these trips, but one experience still creeps me out to this day. A few years ago, I found a long-forgotten water refinery through the help of an online exploration community in Google Earth. Although it's stupid, I always wanted to go to these places alone, partly for the thrill, but because if anything bad would happen, I would have a terrible feeling knowing that I brought somebody else into that situation, so I make plans to head there the next day after school that I'm let out. The day of the trip, I pack up my camera and water bottle, and then set off following a hand-drawn map. And now after an hour or 2 of biking, I finally arrive at the place. Luckily, we had an old bike path that ended just past it. It was completely overtaken by vegetation and trees, though around the buildings, not to mention the actual buildings were just disintegrating, with paint peeling off from every wall and ceiling. I took my time, scouting out each and every building, looking around me for anything interesting. I found hundreds of broken windows, weird broken spears, and some kind of giant oven. After an hour or 2 of successful exploring, I decided to head off happily with an SD card full of photos. After I pull up my bike back through the hole in the fence, I entered and started biking away. I remembered that there was one last shot I wanted to get. I'm pretty insistent on getting the shots I want, and I don't know if I would ever come back. So I decided just to go for it, ride back and take the photo. As I was going back, I saw a lone man dressed in old clothing, walking down the bike trail away from the dead end. I thought it was kind of a strange path to see somebody walking on, and something in me said, "Don't let him go in there." I biked past him, and given him a slight head nod. I figured that I'd bike all the way to the end of the trail, turn around. By the time I got back, he'd be long gone, having continued in the opposite direction. I slowly took my time to get to the end and turn round. As I head back to the hole in the fence, I see him. He's staring at me, walking towards the dead end which he came from. He had a happy look on his face, but it was a kind of happiness that made me feel sick. The best way that I could describe it is like he had been told a very dirty joke and was trying to contain it. I knew I had to do something. I was literally trapped now. I decided to play it cool once more, but be ready to drop everything and run at a hairpin drop. As soon as I got closer to him, I can see his facial expression, and it doesn't look like somebody I want to be in the same vicinity as. I'm silently cursing myself going back for this one picture. As I slowly get closer, finally, when I'm about 20 feet away from him, he calls out and says, "I sure would like a ride. It's so hot out. Mind if I jump on?" As soon as I heard this, I realised that my brain is no longer falsely interpreting the situation. I pick up speed and rush past him, putting as much space between us as I can. I quickly glance behind me. I can see he's turned around and is following me. At this point, I bolt, sprinting down the bike path back onto the road. As I'm on my way back, I stop at a nearby gas station on the way home to get some water. I see a cop when I told him that I just rode down this bike path and what I'd seen. He then looked at me, sort of bewildered as to why somebody would ride out there, and he told me that he didn't recommend that anybody gone there, especially alone, as there's some really shady people that hang out there.
This happened to me when I was in middle school, around age 12. My parents were really involved in helping the local area homeless, and every Thursday night at church, they would get together with a bunch of people and make bag lunches to hand out around town. This meant that every Thursday, my dad had an agreement with the owner of the local area food bank to go in and get some boxes of food to put in the lunches. I like to go with him on Thursday nights, because I sometimes get treats or toys or whatever else was there. For a bit of atmosphere to the story, this food bank was in the creepiest possible place in town. It was by some abandoned railroad tracks, a huge warehouse with not much else around it, except the abandoned fairgrounds across the street. At night it had an extremely creepy vibe, so especially in the winter, I sometimes dreaded going because it's dark so early. One night my dad was looking through the food bank as usual, and we were getting ready to leave. I held the front door open for him so he could carry all the stuff out, and then he was going to lock the door behind him. Well, as soon as I opened the front door, this car came screeching out of nowhere. It looked like a cop car sort of, a rounder sedan, something like that. Its headlights were off. The car pulls up literally just a few feet in front of me, and my stomach is churning. My dad grabs me by the shirt and quite literally throws me back inside, telling me to turn the lights off and lock the door behind me, but I couldn't. I opened the door a crack because I was certain that my dad was about to be killed. 3 very large men got out of the car and stood directly in front of my dad, just staring at him. At that moment, I opened the door further, until I knew they could see me. I couldn't fathom just watching as something terrible happened. These men regarded me, looked at each other, and got back in the car. They drove away, very slowly, and my dad and I hightailed it out there. I completely believe that if I hadn't been there that night, my dad would have been robbed, hurt or killed, possibly all 3.
So this happened last night actually. I live about 20 minutes away from anywhere through back roads and woods. We've gotten a lot of freezing rain, and my mother and I happened to get caught in town during the rain yesterday. We left for home. About halfway there, the road stopped getting salted, so we had to take it very slow. 30-ish miles per hour at the most to keep from sliding. About that time, we cross and over to the untreated roadways. A truck turns out of a driveway behind us with those bright blue lights on. I made a comment about how horrible they are when they hit the mirrors, and we laugh about it and continue. I noticed that this car was tailgating us. I assumed it was doing this because we're going incredibly slowly and didn't say anything. We then pull up to the second and last stop sign on this road, roll through it and go straight. The truck never turned on its blinker to turn, but it turned like it was going to go into an invisible subdivision before it suddenly whipped back towards us and got right behind us again. Now we're both freaking out. It's dark outside, icy, we're 2 minutes away from the home, with this Silverado following us. So now, for some reason, we turn into the driveway with this truck on our tails, and it suddenly stops. It stops on the road, and I can see the wheel turning towards my mirror. They sat there and watched us going up our driveway. They then decided to leave. Looking back on it, we always have lights on and the TV playing, so they would have thought somebody was at home. We had our truck and our 2 minivans in the driveway, so it looked like it was full of people. I think our electric bill was huge that night, but I hate to think what would have happened had they have thought the house was vacant like it actually was.
So, a few years back, I was cruising around with my brother, cousin, and a few friends. We decided to go down this creepy back road. We got to the end of it, and there was a trail that continued off it. We decided to get out and walk the trail, even though it was pitch black. We didn't really have a good feeling about the place, but we pressed on anyway. Now let me say that if anyone else had come down the road, we would have seen their headlights in the woods. So walking back for a little bit, we went back to the cars. My friend Alex stopped and said, "What's that noise?" We all stopped talking and heard a hissing noise. His tyres on his car had been slashed. We all panicked because nobody else would be at this dead-end back road in the middle of nowhere this late. So we got into the cars and took off. Not too far down the road, his car was undrivable and we had to squeeze him in our Jeep. We went to the gas station to get some snacks, and when we come out, the Jeep's tyres were slashed too. I don't know how that could have happened, so it seemed like someone had followed us and slashed our tyres. So creepy forest dwelling tyre slasher, please let's never meet.
Now this happened about 2 years ago. Now the town that we live in is relatively safe if you compare it to the surrounding cities, but in reality, my town is shady. I was 15 at the time and my sister was only 11. One day at around 5 or 6ish, my mother gave me some money to go down to the gas station to get some milk. The gas station is only 3 blocks from our home, and being in high school, I was a part of the football team. So I was quite confident that I could handle my own while going to the gas station. I was wrong. My sister had her heart set on walking down there with me. Even though a girl who got attacked a few roads down from us earlier, my mum let her come with me anyway, though I was still paranoid that something was going to happen to her. Because even though she was 11, she was quite tough for her age, and she was still my baby sister, and I didn't want anything to happen to her. I was, and still am, especially after what happened, very protective of her. So I made her promise she wouldn't walk too far ahead of me and would stay glued to my side the whole time. Anyway, we're about halfway there taking these back roads. I heard what sounded like a car at the time. It sounded like it was coming towards us. I grabbed my sister's arm and pulled her into the grass just to be sure that it didn't hit us, because the road we're on has a very small width. That's when I felt a sharp pain hit me fast. It was in the back of the head and I collapsed and fell to the ground. What the hell was that? My vision was still blurry and tears were probably from the pain. By then, I was also hearing my sister screaming. I look up and finally realise what was going on. It was a guy on a motorcycle, holding a large stick, like one that you find from the woods. I immediately knew that he hit me over the head, then hit my sister too. I'm ashamed to say that I was frozen with fear as I watched him pull out something. I think it was wire. He tied it to my sister's wrist. She was crying and thrashing about. I could hear him muttering about killing me if she didn't cooperate. That's when I finally jolted into action, but God, I couldn't believe what was happening. This guy was trying to take my sister away from me. I then lunged towards him and grabbed the stick out of his palm. I think I only did so because of the adrenaline, and because he was mostly focused on trying to tie up my sister. He yelled out, and that's the last thing he said because I started battering his face in until it snapped in half. He was trying to collect himself, lying on the ground, grabbing his face in pain. I yelled, "Quick, run, run," but I didn't, because I always hated how in horror movies they'd strike the killer down and then run instead of finishing him off, so you can't get away then. That's what popped into my mind, so I go back over to him and kick him really hard in the body. I make him pass out completely. That's when I got out my pocket knife from my back pocket. Instead of going to cut him, I cut my sister free. Now, We take off running. I really think that if it wasn't for my intense adrenaline and the fact that I'm overprotective of my poor little sister, I probably would have gotten killed and she would have gotten kidnapped and God knows what else. Luckily, we made it home safely and my mum called the cops. That guy sadly ran away before he could ever get caught by them.
About 3 years ago, I went on my first wildfire. I had just recently become a certified firefighter and finally got sent out on a 2-week deployment. Without being too specific, let's just say the fire was deep in north central Idaho. It had immensely steep mountains and ultra dense forest. I didn't really have any idea of what to expect. You always hear about wildfires on the news, but it wasn't anything like what actually happens. I expected to show up and be seen as a hero. It turns out the area I went to was very, very familiar with wildfires. Over decades, many of the locals actually grew to hate the firefighters and federal government. Many locals felt that the government was exploiting the fires for money, so they purposefully would take a long time fighting fires. One city nearby blames the government for allowing the fire to burn down more than 50 homes. The first day we were told to stay away from the locals, because they would often approach us friendly, but then become confrontational and violent. On our way to the fire lines, there were signs hung up on trees saying things like, "Turn back now," or "Hope you burn in hell." Needless to say, this is unsettling. We continued for a few days without issue. A few days later we got assigned to a new area. We had rather large engines and lots of water and supplies, so normally we just patrolled the fire borders to make sure the fire didn't jump out of the defensive lines. One day an old man comes driving up on his ATV and starts asking questions about the fire. He informed us that he was a nearby resident and just wanted to be updated. We told him the general information about the fire. He thanked us and was about to drive away when he turned around. He told us not to go up to Red Leaf, or Old Joe lived up there and he hated firefighters. A day later we were placed on structure protection. We were to go home to home and help prepare them because the fire was coming dangerously close. We went to our assigned homes. We actually waited outside the gate for a few minutes to get a little game plan going. We drove up to the house to find a man waiting with a gun on his lap. We carefully approached him. It was the man from the ATV earlier. Apparently some people dressed as firefighters came to his house earlier demanding an evacuation. He left his home, but the people were fake firefighters and had robbed him while he was gone. Luckily we had a massive truck to help prove our legitimacy, so he kindly put away his gun. We helped him prep his house. As we did, he told us these stories about Old Joe who lived on the very top of the lane. He said Joe was a big time conspiracy theorist who had probably hundreds of guns and was famous for his hate of the government. I know it sounds straight out of a movie, some anti-government guy living in the mountains with tons of guns, but it was all true. Old Joe was secretive, even among his neighbours. No one really knew exactly who he was. He said neighbours only really spoke to him in passing on the narrow dirt roads. They just knew he was shooting guns all day and always preaching about his hate for the government. A few days later we were fighting on the front lines. Each area has a commander who's in charge. Before we went out for the day, our commander briefed us. He actually mentioned Old Joe and said that nobody was to go near his property. He also told us about our evacuation point for if the fire was out of control. It happened to be a nearby rock quarry. I was digging some fireline when a loud tone went over the radio and all units in the area were asked to evacuate to the quarry. After arriving, we were told someone spotted a new fire forming below everyone on the main fire line, including me. This is especially dangerous because fire moves uphill very quickly. It was also so smoky that we could barely see 30 feet in front of us. A fire could easily surround you without you knowing. We waited for an hour or so before the commander asked for a volunteer engine to go scout the new fire start. An engine crew that we befriended volunteered and shortly after departed. We then waited for what felt like 2 or 3 hours. Finally the volunteer engine crew came back. They briefed the commander and then came back towards my crew. Ricky, a crew member I befriended, hopped out of the truck with a sickly look on his face. He was pale and almost seemed frail as he stepped out. I asked him what was up. He said that they found a new fire. It was just outside a large clearing. They got out to investigate and found a freshly cut trail with footprints in the mud. They looked around further and could easily see that it had been started with a long line of gasoline. Someone had been there recently. A large line of gas was poured so it would surround the fire crews above, again including myself, and catch them off guard. They quickly hopped back in their engine and hauled us back to the quarry. It wasn't ever to be proven, but everyone was sure that it was old Joe in a failed attempt to burn us 20 plus firefighters alive. Thankfully, a very keen firefighter had noticed a small orange glow behind him through the heavy smoke. Had he not spotted it in time, the narrow and steep roads needed to escape would likely be cut off. The gasoline lines were very carefully placed to cut off our escape. I was scared for a long time afterwards. There is something extremely unsettling knowing someone was plotting your death, especially when you're completely unaware. Was Joe watching me? Was he hidden in the woods nearby waiting for his plan to unfold? Luckily I left a few days later, never to return, and hopefully never to meet old Joe.